This story is a work of fiction. Any part of this story that may exist in the real world is purely coincidental. Some of the places may be real, but the story around them are a work of fiction. This story is a byproduct of the writer's active imagination and is intended to start as fiction and remain as fiction. Claire Du Bois by Henry Hicks. Here is the songs of Corvus Corax, the great black ravens. Thumbs and eyes that end up in my tummy, taste great and always yummy. Cooked over raven's fire or eaten raw, you're dead and gone, maybe your soul's in hell, but your thumbs and eyes are in my belly. The colonists of Roanoke swore they could hear the giant black ravens sing that song as they dug the shallow graves of the cursed to eat their thumbs and eyes and whisked their souls to hell. Roanoke was surprisingly a well-organized colony, with stunning mountain views and water so clear and blue that you could drink gulps directly from the stream. In 1585, most of the dangers that the colony faced were from the constant attacks of the natives, great black bears, and wolves. The disease took many. Physical sickness was viewed as the devil's work and many of the afflicted were burnt on the stake. The only true protection Roanoke had against the dangers of the wild was the bear trappers. Trappers smelled horrendous but trapped buffalo that fed the village, killed wild animals that strayed too close to the children or the chickens. Back in England, these men and rough women were prisoners of the state. They were granted freedom if they rowed the great British ships as ship hands. These criminals had become a nuisance to the townspeople. Once, in the middle of the day, Pastor John Johnson came home early from the church to check on his sick wife. The good pastor walked in on trapper Roland McCarthy, having his way with the preacher's wife. The trappers did what they wanted, after all, they were criminals and protectors. The only way to separate these men and rough women were to build a small town on the outskirts of the colony. It was decided by the city council, a house of ill repute will be built, a brothel. The good townfolk of Roanoke started building the brothel the very following day. Pastor Johnson and the husbands of Roanoke worked day and night to complete the housing in 8 days. The brothel was full of white women who they had brought over in servitude, native Indian women, that the trappers had kept after they had killed all the menfolk in their villages and the African women that lived with the native Indians. To those that could afford it, most of the Indian women were sold as help. Constable Jeffries operated the brothel with the help of a few women folk. The constable didn't believe and frequent baths. Most of his teeth had rotted out or were rotting. His breath smelled like wet cat shit. After drinking warm red wine on hot summer days, the smell of his breath was heightened to an unbearable stench. The townsfolk would refer to him as skunk. He was aware of his problem and sucked on black licorice and dry cinnamon. This did help for brief moments, just long enough for him to have quick conversations and hold meetings. Constable Jeffries would invite women to his home, married or single, it didn't matter to him. He told them he wanted to talk about the town's business. The meeting was just a masquerade. What he really wanted was to force the women into being his concubine. If they didn't succumb to his sexual demands, he would accuse them of being witches and have them burnt at the stake. In fear for their lives, most agreed. Those that didn't met their fate within weeks. He couldn't afford to give them enough time to tell their side of the story. The other women were horrified to see how fast Constable would carry out his threats. Even the husbands that knew what he had done didn't have the nerve to undress Mr. Jeffries's deeds. That was until he met Claire Du Bois. She told her story in the monthly town meeting for all to hear. Her rebuke of Jeffries was loud and open. Claire was only 19 and already the most beautiful girl in town. She was the daughter of a French father and a native Indian mother, named Bimala. Bimala was from a local tribe, which shared the lakes and land with Roanoke. How the Indian had come to live with the Frenchman was that of a mystery to the townspeople. Once the local and only storekeeper in town asked Bimala why she was insistent on not changing her name to a fine Christian name. She told the storekeeper that Bimala is a pure name, meaning spirit walker. He scoffed at the idea that an Indian could ever be pure and said as much. She had a room in the back of the home, far away from Claire and her father. Her mother remained in that back room, even after getting pregnant and giving birth to Claire. There was a lot of talk in the colony when Bimala started to show signs of pregnancy. The colonist said that she had put a redskin spell on Claire's dad. Once Claire was born, she was so beautiful and looked normal, by the colonist standards. She didn't look like a half-breed. Claire had sandy blonde hair like most of the people in the colony. She had beautiful green eyes. No one had eyes like that. She blossomed at 15 and had many suitors but rejected them all. Her mom's use of natural flowers and herbs to treat simple sickness and help with childbirth had made her the local doctor as such. Bimala had become a pillar of Roanoke. When she came to her daughter's defense against Mr. Jeffries, others started to question him. Mr. Jeffries had to react fast. He convinced critical people in town that Claire had bewitched half the town. To save the townsfolk from doom, they would need to silence Claire immediately. The pastor, governor, mayor, and Mrs. Waller, the head of the Women of Roanoke Social Club, agreed. Claire Debois would be hung the next day and buried by nightfall in a potter's grave. Roanoke had a darker side. Sundays after church, they would gather to listen to the crackling sound of some afflicted soul being burnt on the stake. Hanging witches took place on Saturday afternoon when the sun was highest in the sky. Most Saturdays after a good witch hanging, they would have a feast to celebrate the cleansing of the village and a great harvest. The people of Roanoke washed in absolute mysticism and deity of the unknown. They feared the red and black faces of the natives. They feared the wild animals that attacked and ate men, women, and children without regard. The eyes of Roanoke were dead and blackened with the ecstasy of barbarism. They believed physical afflictions, sores, reactions to clean food, were the signs of demons. Those poor souls afflicted with spasms found themselves quickly put to the stake. They weren't burned doing their human form. The townspeople had to wait for the demon to come back before burning the body. It was the only way to trap the demon and burn it with the body of the possessed. The possessed spent days roped to the stake, watched by the town's jester. When the spasms started, the jester would dance about the person, screaming and laughing. Once a crowd gathered, the jester would begin lighting the deadwood that was stacked waist-high to the poor soul. As the fire heat intensified, the jester would play with the kids in the crowd, pass out sweet cold water to the people, and everyone danced to the flames. Hours after the flames had died out, it was up to the lady folks to remove the burnt meaty skeleton remains. They never used too much wood. They needed human remains to leave in shallow graves for the giant black ravens. This was the last process in getting rid of the unclean spirit of witches and the possessed. If a witch spirit loomed around the town, people would have bad luck, livestock, horses, and corn crops would die. This day was over. It was time to set the tables and celebrate the defeat of another enemy. Roanoke celebrated the seventh Sabbath, the night after Claire's death and burial. While people married about, the wind gained strength and blew tin cups, plates, and jars of wine to the ground. Candles used to light the festival were distinguished with one gust of wind, like a child blowing out a single birthday candle. A sheet of darkness covered the town. Even the tough trappers felt a sudden chill in the air. Small children and adults cried and held each other in fear. Colonists struggled to find their way home. Once home, they would search for candles and flint to light fires for the chimney. Without the warmth and light of the fire, they would be in darkness, with only the light of the blood moon and stars. From a single gust of wind, a hot summer night had turned cold and dark. Sounds of hundreds of ravens echoed throughout the colony. Begging for forgiveness, many colonists fell to their knees in prayer. Those prayers will go unanswered tonight. Thumbs and eyes that end up in my tummy taste great and always yummy. Cooked over raven's fire or eaten raw, you're dead and gone. Maybe your soul's in hell, but your thumbs and eyes are in my belly. Ravens frantically dug at Claire's shallow grave. The wind howled through the cabins, carrying the shrilling calls of hundreds of black ravens descending on the grave. They dug at an inhuman pace. The force of their giant wings flapping moved earth faster than the claws on their feet. They had finally unearthed the body of Claire Debois. Before stepping into his cabin, Mr. Jeffries turned toward the hill. He heard the songs from the black ravens. He listened for a brief second, before slowly closing the door with his pinky finger. Everyone else could hear too. For that colonist brave enough to look out of their windows, they could see the giant ravens dancing together in the night sky. Their wings cast long shadows over the cabins and trees. It was the devil's night. Claire floated above her grave. What they feasted on was the mortal body. A body of a true witch sheds like a snake. A witch doesn't know she is a witch until their rebirth by death. The ravens were quiet and as still as a statue. Their cayenne color eyes bled tears of blood. She pointed at the ground and called upon creatures so foul that Satan locked them in the deepest part of hell. They were too evil to give a name, he only called them eat things. Hundreds were summoned from the grave. I, Claire Debois, summon you eat things, from the deepest hell. Feast on all that live in the town below. But do not touch the women defiled by that slop Jeffries. Feast on the rest and return to your grave, never to walk the earth again. The ground became soft and slowly caved inward as eat things climbed out of the soil. Claire turned toward a small patch of unmarked graves. She pointed her finger and chanted, "Raise innocent women of Roanoke, you are no longer damned. You are my clan." Bimala stood on Mountain Peak Ridge, above Claire. She watched her daughter destroy Roanoke. A colony that would become one of history's great mysteries. Claire had large white wings that seemed to engulf the space around her. She was the second true witch behind her mom, Bimala, and had inherited all the powers of the Highness of Darkness. There were hundreds of great black ravens eclipsing the light of the moon. Claire had risen from the dead. Tree branches broke under the pressure of the wind from Claire's massive wings. The wings for hundreds of ravens were now in sync with the flapping of Claire's wings. Claire looked down on the remains of her human form. She wasn't ready to go to hell. This time Mr. Jeffries had indeed hung a witch, but little did the town of Roanoke know, you can't kill a witch by hanging. History will read that the people of Roanoke disappeared overnight. The cabins stood intact. Warm tea still on the stove and food on the table. But there wasn't a single person or animal to be found. Before descending back to hell, those eat things left their return names, given to them by the phantom on trees and cabins. 435 years later. The year is 2020. Mike and Rhea had to push through the crowd just to exit the club. Chicago clubs were crazy like that. People struggled to get in and out of the club. Chicagoans loved their winters. It would take more than 15 degrees below zero to keep Mike from celebrating his birthday. Rhea stretched her arm out to touch the moon. It was so bright it seemed that close. A full moon was a regular occurrence for the last 2 nights. The news had said this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see a blood moon. People were already acting crazy, and the news suggested that people stay in and view the moon from the safety of their homes. It was late, but that didn't stop Mark from having the bright idea to walk 4 blocks to the all-night bakery. They could get hot chocolate and get a shared ride home. After 2 city blocks, the frigid wind overtook them. The wind blew directly in Rhea's face, forcing her eyes to tear. Tears rolled midway down her face before freezing into small round ice bubbles. The once soft snowflakes now felt like shard glass. They took refuge in an alley off State and Washington. It was dark, and the wind still found them, but not like before. He held Rhea close as they walked down the alley. "Mark, what is that?" Rhea said as she pointed at a small figure hiding behind a large green garbage bin. He grabbed Rhea's hand as she moved closer to the figure. "Look, it's a child," said Rhea. "That ain't no child, in an oldest blanket, in Chicago at 1 in the morning, with temperatures -10 with wind chill factors. Let's get out of here. Rhea didn't listen, she continued to move closer. Mark thought he heard teeth chattering. He stood up straight, turning his head left and then right, looking for the origin of the sound. The wind was blowing so hard that you could hear cats meowing to the sound of debris clunking against trash cans and brick walls. "Hey Rhea, did you hear that?" asked Mark as he pulled on her coat. Rhea waved him off, now more determined to see what was under the blanket. Mark anxiously repeated his question to Rhea. "Hey Rhea, did you hear that? We should get the hell out of here." Rhea pulled the old torn blanket, thinking she was going to find some small child or homeless person in need. "Don't worry, little guy, we're going to get you someplace safe and warm," said Rhea. Just as the figure turned and locked eyes with the couple, Rhea stood up to run, but it was too late to escape. It was also too late to scream. The only light in the alley hung above the back door of Chang's dumpling shop. The light was strapped to a short rustic hemp rope and swung back and forth, revealing only the gruesome silhouette of Mark and Rhea being devoured by tentacles from the mouth of the beast. They were cocooned, as the meat and flesh from their body dissolved into liquid. The beast used its tentacles to drink them whole. The gulping sound permeated the alley. Meowing cats were now hissing, with their tails straight and back humped. Gulp, gulp, gulp. The crunching bones being chewed and swallowed by one of those beasts was the last ominous sound heard in that alley. Spots of saliva and blood lay on the ground like perfect circles. The beast was startled by the sounds of Ms. Chang walking out of the restaurant's back door, carrying cans and bottles in a trash bag, as if on cue. Thanks for listening to part 1 of 3 readings. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for the next reading of Claire Debois. Thanks for following Audible Shorts Henry Hicks.